All right. It appears that we are live. I'm going to give everyone, it's just now 6:31, so give everyone time to join. Maybe just a minute or so. If you're just joining us, hello and welcome. I should look at the correct camera. I sent out an email to the Eventbrite attendees about 15 minutes ago with the direct link to our YouTube stream. If you want to be able to participate in the live chat, you want to go to that link rather than the Eventbrite page. Yes, so if you have any questions, just take a look back at your email, or you can email us and we will send the link directly to you. Kristen is helping out with the background stuff. Okay. We have a couple of viewers. Great. All right. Hello, everybody. This is Julia. I'm one of the co-owners of Itinerant Literate Books. We are hosting authors tonight, Isaac Bailey and Claudia Smith-Brinson, in a conversation about the history of the civil rights movement in South Carolina, as well as the lasting effects today of the white supremacy and perhaps the effects of Trumpland in Isaac's terminology. If you're just joining us, I was going to give one more reminder. We have sent out directly to you the link to the live YouTube channel. If you want to be able to participate in the live chat, you definitely want to use that link rather than just going through the Eventbrite page. I see Mackenzie's used the chat feature. So if you use a live chat on the side, you can send that. We can see that. That is how we will later in the discussion get questions from you all who are viewing. So as you're listening, definitely jot down some notes and let us know. We're going to have about 30 minutes of discussion between the authors, and we'll turn it over to you, the viewers, to let us know what you'd like to hear about. All right. Sorry, I had something move behind me. I think it's my dog. I hope it's my dog. Okay, anyway. So I'm going to hand it over to Isaac to tell us a little bit about his book, Why Didn't We Riot? And about himself, and then I'll pass it off to Claudia for her intro as well.
Sure. Yes, hi. I am a long time journalist here in South Carolina. Yes, and I also teach at Davidson College in North Carolina. Yes, and also I was actually born in Charleston. And yet, though, that I was raised in St. Stephen, South Carolina, which is in Berkeley County. It's this really, really small town there. And then for me, this place has been home forever. Which is why I love it and am also frustrated by it. Again and again and again, and also my motivation for this particular book actually grew out of my frustration and anger. Simply because we had actually gotten this reputation of actually being moderate, on the issue of race recently. In fact, when former Governor Haley, at least actually praised Black people for not rioting after the Dylann Roof shooting, for instance. That's in terms of that. It actually kind of angered me, simply because that it seems though that she was actually using that in order to essentially excuse all of these racial injustices and deep disparities which are still with us. Yes, and for me, that those are things that should upset us. Yes, and so, and the fact that like it actually has not actually angered us enough recently. Actually forced me to like actually write this book.
Okay, my turn. I'm Claudia, and I, like Isaac, have practiced journalism for a very long time and also taught writing at the University of South Carolina and Columbia College. And am not from South Carolina. I was a military brat, but I have family connections. Although I'm old enough to have grown up in segregated schools, I did not, because President Harry Truman, desegregated the military before I was of school age. So most of my experiences, especially when I was outside of the continental United States, were in desegregated schools. That does not mean that I didn't see racism. It just means that my experience might be somewhat different from other white people in the United States. This book that I wrote is collections of stories, mostly from the activists that I interviewed. I, as a journalist, began noticing that when I talked to older Black people who participated in the civil rights movement, their experiences of South Carolina did not in any way match what the white leaders claimed South Carolina was like. In other words, the word moderate was propaganda. It was not true at all. And so I began making an effort to interview Black activists for the newspaper, and then for this book. I found them to be some of the best people I had ever met in my life, and it distressed me to think that their stories might die with them. And the reason their stories might die with them is because they did not have the megaphone that white newspapers and white leaders have. In some cases, they were not telling their stories to their family and friends because they were so distressing. And because we often find that the stories of oppression are distressing to the listener as well as to the teller. And so that may repress them too. And so I'm very grateful that I met people who were willing to let me preserve their stories. And I found that to become a quest and sort of a spiritual need on my part and perhaps on their part too. So the book deals with certain periods of time in South Carolina, but is not driven by time, it's driven by the stories. And I focus on Briggs versus Elliott, which became the first lawsuit in Brown versus Board of Education, which ended segregation in public schools in the United States through Supreme Court decisions. It began in Somerton, South Carolina. And while there have been many, a history book or an article written about Brown versus Board of Education, it focused on the great men. They did not talk about the petitioners. And what I was interested in was the people who were doing this, not the people who were arguing it in the halls of our courts. I also cover the sit-ins city by city. There's several historically Black colleges and universities in South Carolina, and that's where the majority of sit-ins were. So, for example, Allen and Benedict in Columbia, and Voorhees in Denmark, Morris College in Sumter, and Claflin and South Carolina State in Orangeburg. And again, what I'm focusing on here are the people who were practicing the sit-ins, picketing, and the marches. And the last chapter is on what is considered the last big civil rights movement in the United States. And that was when Ralph Abernathy of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference was trying to step into the shoes of Martin Luther King, and the leaders of labor unions both entered Charleston in 1968-69 to assist the nurses' aides, 400 of them, who were striking from what was then Medical College Hospital and the Charleston County Hospital, because although we'd had the 64 and 65 Civil Rights Acts, they did not have a minimum wage, they did not have bathrooms, they did not have cafeterias. The Medical College Hospital had been in trouble with federal government since 1965, and like South Carolina is wont to do, had ignored that and just dragged things on. And so these women were mostly distressed about the lack of human dignity that they experienced. And they took to the streets with their children and our governor of the time, Robert McNair, sent in armed troops with tanks to deal with 400 women and their children. So there are also ministers that are focused on in the book, because NAACP often was led by ministers for a variety of reasons. One was that their parishioners weren't going to fire them. Another one was it would be really awkward for the KKK if they felt the need to kidnap or murder, which did happen, a minister. And also, they were the people who had education and were perhaps more comfortable dealing with white elite. So these ministers were very important. But the NAACP wasn't the only civil rights organization in South Carolina. And as Isaac and I move along to talk about youth, I'll probably bring up the Congress of Racial Equality and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which were other organizations that young people used. So that's the book.
Wonderful. Thank you both for giving us those overviews of the work and yourselves. And I think we'll jump into the questions, especially since Claudia gave us a great intro there. I wanted to start by talking about sort of what Claudia mentioned, the disconnect between especially white leaders and people on the ground in the civil rights movement and what they were experiencing. And I think that sentiment comes up definitely in the essays of your collection, Isaac, about this disconnect between what people say has happened and what is actually experienced and lived. And I was wondering if y'all could get us started by talking about that and how it applies to both of your works.
I'll give you a quick story, Isaac, that you can think about. At a certain point, there were many cities during the sit-ins, which is 1960. That's 1960s when they took fire and spread throughout the South. And there were many cities that relatively quickly desegregated their downtowns. And one of the ways they did that was through biracial committees. And when our governor, South Carolina's governor, was asked to create a biracial committee, he said, "Why would I confuse and ruin the good Negroes that I deal with by putting them on a committee like that?" So, what do you think of that?
Yes, yes. I mean,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, like that absolutely sounds really, really typical. Yes, like, and also that like that still sort of actually happens today. I mean, just and yet though that like it is actually with sort of like more kind of that coded language. Yes, yes. I mean, yes, and because I mean, even if we take the sort of like Dylan Roof shooting, for instance, yes, I mean, yes, and then that like one of the major themes that came out of that quickly, like was that these sort of like families like had immediately like at least forgiven Roof. I mean, yes, and then like this actually became like a big, huge deal, and everybody said they were so inspired, et cetera, and like all these sort of things. And yet, though, that if you sort of actually spoke to sort of individual like family members, yes, and then that like that actually like was a like, much more that complex story. I mean, yes, like and also yes, like and also sort of especially sort of actually with the sort of younger family members like were sort of like much more like, upset, like and also sort of actually really wanted to be able to express that like and sort of like actually with very good reason, obviously. Like and yet though that like that sort of like narrative like what sort of like actually like at least like actually comforted people so quickly. Like it actually got rooted in anyway, and then yet though that what sort of happens in those situations like is that like once folks sort of actually get back to comfort, yes, and then that there sort of like is no longer this urgency in order for real change, like which will actually need sacrifice, etc. I mean, yes, it's like again and again and again, like we have like actually seen that like in our history, like in this state, unfortunately.
I started to think a lot about the word propaganda.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of the lost cause arises. There's been some feminist scholars that are dealing with this, white and black, from the Daughters of the Confederacy, working very hard, to erect the monuments and craft a story where their noble men, dead or alive, were rescuing this lovely culture. And they were enormously successful in that with white people. So I think a lot about this, because if you look at the history of the governors in the 1940s and the 1950s and the early 1960s in South Carolina, you see them quite frankly saying white supremacy will be maintained. And so Burns, for example, Governor Burns, said that if necessary, the schools would be closed rather than desegregate. And the people of South Carolina approved a constitutional amendment that would close schools rather than desegregate. Now think about the value system there. We would rather have our children uneducated than have them sitting with our neighbors in our town who happen to be black. So those things seem to be missing from the narrative. And I find that you were talking about comfort, Isaac, that white people just, it makes them so unhappy, because if they are well-intentioned, they're embarrassed that they don't know this. They're uncomfortable, perhaps, that they didn't notice it if they're old enough. They don't like the phrase white privilege, which is how you manage to be protecting yourself or have your parents protect you from it. And they don't want to feel complicit. And so, as you're pointing out, there's this enormous stall where we can't deal with our history. And if we don't deal with our history, we aren't dealing with our present, and we aren't have a better future. We really are stalled or becalmed. And I find it a great tragedy that we're better off knowing the bad things and figuring out. Holocaust museums are all about this. How not to do this again. I was listening to an Ibram Kendi talk recently, and he was pointing out that Germany does not have statues memorializing Nazis. Asia does not have statues memorializing the Pol Pot. And yet we are in a state where it will take both sides of the legislature to agree to remove a statue of someone like Pitchfork Ben Tillman, who was leading raids of the red shirts who murdered black citizens with impunity.
Right. Yes. I mean, like also, like, and the fact that like it actually took the sort of like blood like of those 9 victims of Dylan Roof in order to like actually get that flag like off of State House grounds, like which had like actually been flying there for what is, I think it was something like 53 or 54 years or something like that. Yes, like, and also again that like if you are black, like, and you live in this place, I mean, yes, and then that you are sort of actually told that you sort of actually must accept those flags, like even on sort of like public property, like, and those monuments and memorials at courthouses, at the State House, all around, like, and also sort of like actually have to like actually at least like actually sort of actually ride on roads sort of actually named after these folks, like, and also sort of actually have to see kind of like all of these like housing developments sort of like actually called plantation, like, yes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, and yes, and then so like yes, like, and also sort of like on back top of that, like our sort of our sort of my criminal justice system like is sort of actually built on our backs. Yes, and so I mean, yes, and so like for me, and sort of yes, and then that yes, and then that anytime that this is pointed out, like actually by a Black person, yes, and then that like we actually get sort of like lectured, and like sort of just like and also just in terms of that, like we are sort of actually just told to shut up essentially. Yes, like and because at least like these sort of like feelings like of the folks like who actually love that flag like always must come first. And yet though like if you can like, actually just imagine like if sort of like Jews in Germany sort of actually had to like actually look at like those kind of things like all around. At least like actually when it came to sort of like statues of Hitler, like and like the Nazi flag, like actually flying all around, etc. And also sort of like actually having like their sort of like justice system, at least like actually built on the backs of Jews, for instance. Yes, and then that, like, I think that like we here sort of actually would be outraged by that. Like we actually would be, like we actually think we would like actually think that that was horrific. And yet, though, that that is what we do every single day here in the state.
Well, I think there are lots of differences, but one of the differences is international pressure. Many nations were involved in World War II, and there was enormous international pressure afterwards to have this not happen again. There was a moment when international pressure pushed presidents to start thinking more seriously about civil rights, and that was part of the Brown decision, that Russia was making a very large point of, oh, you say you're democracy, but you don't allow your citizens to vote, and you brutalize them. And this was constantly being brought up. And the Attorney General for the nation actually argued, and in their friend to court statements, there were statements about how international opinion was very much against the U.S. and its behavior, and that it was very difficult to fight communism when you couldn't claim that you were behaving well yourselves, and that this was one of the arguments for desegregating schools.
Yes. It's like also like, and then that at least for me, like this actually got worse. I'm sort of actually like first, like actually back in sort of like November like of like 2008, actually when Obama sort of like actually won the first time, and I saw a drastic difference like in like in like the attitude of sort of like many of my white friends and colleagues and fellow Christians, etc. Like whereas that they actually became like more sort of like open about their sort of like racial animus. And then like actually by sort of like 2015, these actually when sort of like Trump sort of like showed up. Yes, and then like that really exploded. And it has actually still been that same way since then. Yes, like, and also sort of like lastly for me, that like one of the most disturbing aspects of it, like is sort of like how our faith sort of actually has been used like in order to actually like just like in order to actually spread sort of like racism like and sort of like white supremacy. Yes, like and because like what actually really got me is sort of that like yes in terms of that like right after that sort of like roof shooting, because of course like we actually saw like all these folks like actually come together in these like interracial hugs and chains across the bridge, etc., and all these things. Oh yes, wonderful, etc. Yes, yes, and then sort of like actually shortly after that, like as soon as Trump showed up, yes, and then that like those sort of like same kind of like white friends, really, who were sort of at least like a part like of like, all of that like interracial healing stuff. sort of like instantly sort of actually went over to him and embraced him and all of his bigotry and racism. Yes, and so like for me, like that part of it, like is going to be, I mean, like hardest thing in order to like overcome, like in years to come.
You said in one of, I think it may have been in the introduction, but or at least the first essay, that you were writing your book as a corrective.
Yes.
That you felt that not enough people were saying just what you're saying, right?
Yes. Like and because like my sort of that frustration like actually has been growing over the years, simply because like I had thought that like we were actually making like some kind of like progress like on these like issues, like, and also that like that is why I sort of actually spent so I think it was about 17 years like in this like mostly white church in Conway, for instance. I mean, yes, and so like I was trying to like actually do that kind of outreach like over all these years, et cetera, like in order to be a model, et cetera. And I thought that like I sort of actually had been breaking through some. And then like all of a sudden, like it was obvious that sort of yes, in terms of that something else deeper was there. And that that has really, really disturbed me since. I mean, yes, and then that like at least for you, yes, and then that like I know that you actually deal a lot like actually with like these sort of like civil rights era, and then sort of I mean, at least back then we actually have sort of McCain's letter, at least like actually like from a sort of like Birmingham jail, like which was like also like actually talking about like some of those same kind of frustrations. Yes, and then so yes, and then that like in your interviews, I mean yes, and then that did you see that same kind of thing as well?
Well, there definitely were. They're generational movements. I think you can't say there's a movement really, or
Right.
even.
Right.
So the NAACP was adults who are pursuing lawsuits. You know,
Right.
and there are people who are taking great risks with those lawsuits. There was someone mistaken for a petitioner in Clarendon County. This is the Briggs suit, who was murdered. One of the lead ministers' house was burned down. There was a murder plot against him that failed, and then another one that ran him out of the state, for example. And these lawsuits took a very long time because sometimes petitioners ran away, disappeared, were murdered, decided not to because of the incredible pressures on them. And then you had to work your way through the courts. For example, with the sit-in lawsuits, the arguments that these students were exercising First Amendment rights rather than trespassing or breaching the peace, they lost in the state of South Carolina and then slowly made their way to the Supreme Court, where they won because their First Amendment rights were protected there. So one of the reasons the sit-in students were doing something different from the courts is because they felt it was too slow and not effective enough, and they wanted their moment. You know, they were getting educated, they had hopes for their lives, and they felt that they didn't want to wait like their parents had. Another part of that was they were unhappy with moments where they had seen their parents lose their dignity, be humiliated, and their parents would explain to them that that was for safety. And, you know, you can't argue with those decisions when someone's shooting through your windows at night. But those were painful memories for them, and they wanted to change that. So I'm not really answering your question about the pendulum swing, but I am trying to say that I do think movements may take more than one generation, not hundreds of years, Isaac, and that as they change not just because of the time, but because there has been some accrual that's empowered the next style of the movement people to do something different that may be as effective or even less effective. And so there's nothing static, and some things are more successful than others, but we're also creatures of our time. And I fear, when I think about what you're talking about, was that in some way it became socially acceptable again to show hatred and a desire to oppress other people. And I really don't want to. I hate to think that way. I'm sure anybody would hate to think that way. That there are plenty of people out there who just couldn't wait to rip their mask off. But it does feel that way sometimes.
Yeah. Yes, it definitely does. Yes. I mean, yes, like,
I'm going to read you something that Thomas Gaither said. So Thomas Gaither was at Claflin, and in 1960, he was one of the leaders of the Orangeburg student movement, which was the most active in the state in terms of numbers and also events. And he had grown up in Great Falls. His father was a fireman for the mills, and that was the only job that Black people could get at the mills. All the other jobs went to white people. His mother was a school teacher, really, really smart and pretty unhappy with the limited school he was in. And when he got to Claflin, he started reading The Life of Mahatma Gandhi and the Gandhi Reader. He started reading Gandhi's words himself. And when he first started thinking about Gandhi's practice, which is called satyagraha, or holding on to truth, and was later translated as soul power, he disdained it because he thought about his parents being peaceful and being humiliated. But the more he read about it, he decided it wasn't a weapon for the weak, that it was civil disobedience and a refusal to submit to injustice, and that took tremendous courage. So he became one of the leaders. And he told me that he thought that nonviolence offered, this is a quote, a high moral plane that the opposition couldn't begin to understand. He said, and I think about the sit-ins where people, young Black men and women are in their Sunday best, they're holding a Bible, they're staring down while people behind them are hitting them with objects, burning cigarettes in their backs, throwing ammonia on them. And they're sitting there and accepting that. But what he said was, you became a threat to the system when you sat down to order a Coke or hamburger. When a nice, well-dressed, polite person shows up for a hamburger and you won't serve them, it says something about you, not about the person wanting to be recognized as a human being. Yeah. And that's pretty much what I think of about taking the mask off. It says something about you, that you were walking around with this mask, and the first chance you could take the opportunity to be hateful again, you were. Or the first opportunity you took to deny other people opportunities to have a good life, you tried that denial. It doesn't say anything negative about the person striving, right? And I'm puzzled that that's not really obvious.
Yes. Yes. And that, like, at least sort of like what I've actually learned, at least from like actually sort of like studying that period, yes, but also sort of like actually living now, like it's the fact that we actually need sort of like both those efforts, like in terms of like that kind of extreme nonviolence, just to like actually force people to like, at least to like actually expose themselves. And also that like we actually need to be expressing anger as well. Yes, like, and because that yes, like, and because that like that too sort of like actually like it actually creates this sense of urgency also. Yes, like but yes, like, and because sort of like what I have like also learned like yes, I guess like over like the past 20 years or so, like is that like if sort of like folks like me like actually like don't express our anger, I mean, yes, and then that like there are a lot of white people in the state sort of like who actually will like actually take that and then say, well, then like that actually means that everything is fine, everything is okay, like there's nothing wrong, simply because like all of these like happy people like are like actually just running around. Yes, and it's like therefore that like there like is like there sort of like is sort of like no real reason in order to actually even talk about race or change things at all. Yes, like, and also, I mean, yes, well, yes, like, and also, so like for me, that I am angry, for instance, at least about, at least about this guy named Jamar Huggins. I'm really like, who was sort of actually put in that prison for 15 years. Like on sort of like literally no evidence, right? I mean, yes, I mean like no evidence, so none whatsoever, and yet though that like he is like actually sitting in a South Carolina prison, and also that even though that I've actually been sort of actually banging the drums like on like this case and others, etc. for years, like I've actually gone to the cops, I've gone to the prosecutors, I've gone to like everybody, etc. And yet, uh, uh, um, and yet though, and then that simply because like there like is not a groundswell of anger about those kinds of cases. I mean, yes, and then that like those kind of guys like actually sort of actually just end up being thrown away and forgotten. Yes, so like for me, like we sort of actually need like both of them, like in order to actually push progress forward today.
In Colombia, the first 2 days of the sit-ins, there were like 400 to 500 students participating, and then they decided to do a pause, and they issued a statement to the governor and the mayor and maybe the police chief. But what I want to tell you was they said, and I thought this was really their main point. They said, "We want you to understand, we are not happy. You keep saying that Black citizens are satisfied with their lot in life.
Right.
No, hundreds of us are not,
Right.
and here we are." And that I think numbers do speak. So would you think then that the protests, for example, in Seattle were effective, or?
Like I think that like that kind of like prolonged like kind of scream essentially is like is a necessary component like in order to like actually lead to real change. I mean, yes, so like for me, yes, again, that like I think that that is one sort of like vital piece like of a larger strategy. Yes, like, and because it's like actually what it does is to like actually like always like actually keep that urgency on those issues. I mean, yes, like, and because like as soon as folks go quiet for sort of like whatever reason that they go quiet, as soon as that happens, I mean, yes, and then that like the sort of that likelihood like of sort of that real change like actually goes way, way down. Like and also sort of like shortly before like that sort of that roof shooting, for instance, like in Myrtle Beach in 2015, there sort of actually was like the shooting like of sort of like Julian Benton here. Yes, in terms of that, like he sort of actually was like this young Black dude like who had allegedly sort of actually sold like some like marijuana, like some sort of like some sort of like some sort of like really really small amount of marijuana. I mean, yes, and then so like for that like we actually had our sort of yes like our sort of yes our sort of like drug enforcement unit. I'm like and he sort of actually gather up and like actually sort of like actually raid his house like just like and also sort of like actually without knocking, and then yes, and then that like they actually shot like into his apartment about like 20 times or so. Yes, like yes I think they like actually hit him like 8 or 9 times, etc. I mean yes, and then that he sort of like paralyzed for life, and also that like they actually lied about at least about sort of like knocking at least before entering, like, and also just like, and also sort of like falsely claimed that he actually like shot at them first. I mean, so like all of this happened. Excuse me. And yet, like what happened like in like the Myrtle Beach area after that? Like there was no outrage. Like there weren't any protests, any riots, etc. And also that this press conference actually by the sort of like prosecutor here, sort of actually praising the cops early on. I mean, yes, so again, that even though that those kinds of things are happening here and elsewhere, yes, in terms of that, yes, and then that like if we sort of actually do not show how sort of yes, in terms of like how sort of like angry we are about it, and it actually just becomes like this kind of like background noise in the norm. I mean, yes, so like for
one of the
me,
things that Charleston hospital strikers said was, well, sort of two things. One of them was that at first you want to be there every day. You want to be there every day, and it becomes something you want to get up in the morning and you want to go do. And then it becomes a badge of honor to go to jail. Let's go to jail today, as they say. But at a certain point in time, different for everybody, of course, you're tired.
Yes.
Just like people are tired now of COVID, and so things fade. And the other aspect of keeping the pressure on or keeping the outrage apparent is that everybody is not a protester. And this was something the students talked with me about, and some of the elders too, that there are different roles for people. Chuck McDew, who was one of the activists and a football player, said he told the football players, if you can't take it and be nonviolent, this is not your role. You're going to have to go make the signs. You're going to have to go be the scout. You can't be sitting there and punch somebody because then he's going to beat your girlfriend to a pulp. And so there was a lot of conversation about the appropriate role that you have in the movement, and it may not always be out on the front. And then if you are the one on the front, because you're getting so much anger directed at you and so much physical threats, and you may be losing your other life, it can't be sustained for infinite amounts of times. And so that's a real problem of a movement. How do you keep refreshing it or protecting the foot soldiers, so to speak?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
And then the other horrible thing here is the examples you're giving. At some point, people don't respond to them, do they?
Right.
Yeah. People of different views just stop responding.
Right.
I was gonna. We have an audience question that is related to this idea of continuing the outrage to continue the movement. And it's from Mackenzie, and she is wanted to know about your work with students in North and South Carolina. Isaac, do you think that if the educational system had a more comprehensive history of the civil rights movement, there would be more, it would lead to more of this outrage as well as empathy and compassion?
Like, yes, like I absolutely believe that is a real component, like of sort of like why it is that we accept sort of like so many things that are really unacceptable. Yes, like, and also because in part that so a lot of people like actually frankly like don't actually know these things. Like even though that we have like, actually talked about race and slavery and the civil rights movement, et cetera, all these things for a very long time, that like at least like actually when you sit down with people, students, et cetera, like they really don't know most of these things. And it sort of used to surprise me. Yes, me. But now yes, in terms of that, like I sort of actually have sort of actually seen like these sort of like value, like sort of like teaching people about these things first. Yes, yes, like and because like that piece of it, like even in 2020, is still missing. Yes, and so like for me, uh, uh, um, the sort of like first step like is sort of like this kind of like radical truth telling, like that is the first step. Yes, and then so like after that, oh yes, and then I think it might be easier, like in order to like actually move people, in order to like actually get them to see that like all of these things that we have accepted for all these years, like actually should not stand any longer.
I want to recommend a book that I think is really powerful and would speak to what you're talking about. It's called Out of the House of Bondage by Claudia. And there are several history books where historians looked at the diaries of women who were on um, large tracts of land with slaves while their husbands were gone during the Civil War, and they were keeping diaries. And Claudia went back to look at how the white women dealt with the enslaved people in and out of their houses. And so the white historians have been focusing on these brave women, tilling the land. What Claudia went back and looked at was they weren't even confessions or admissions. They're just asides about how they had picked up the shovel and broken somebody's head because she was rude to them, or how they were starving people deliberately because they were worried about the food. And I heard her speak about this, and she said, someone asked her, how do you bear doing this, collecting this information? And she said it was, of course, extremely distressing, and she had to have a conversation with herself about it. And she decided that this job had found her. It was her job, and she would do it because this was an enormously important piece of the whole picture that had, for whatever reasons, been omitted and that we needed to see.
Yeah.
And it certainly changes the narrative, doesn't? From courage to what? Terrorism?
Exactly. Yes. Yes, it definitely does. Yes, like, and also sort of, I mean, yes, like, and also that you actually mentioned earlier the sort of like Ben Tillman that statue, like at like the State House. Yes, like, and like for me, like that is one of the sort of like best illustrations like of this issue. Yes, like, and because sort of there is that massive statue, like actually sort of like right at the entrance, like as you're trying to come like onto State House grounds. Yes, like, and that like it is of a man like who actually bragged about lynching black people like in order to gain power, etc. And yet, though, that if you sort of actually read like the sort of like statue, like and sort of just like and sort of like what's on it, like it actually doesn't tell you that, like it doesn't say any of that whatsoever. I mean, yes, and then so like what has happened, like is that like we sort of actually have sort of at least like actually created this kind of like alternative reality, like which has actually made it harder in order for people to like actually understand sort of like what really happened and also sort of like what is happening now.
And why was he murdering people? To stop them from voting.
Right.
Yeah. Stop them from owning land, take back land that they had in the businesses that they were building.
Exactly.
To stop fellow citizens in their tracks.
Exactly. Yeah.
I was going to quickly relay, we had a comment from Paul Bowers in the chat that Chandra Manning's What This Cruel War was over was distressing, similarly to what you were saying, Claudia, from the book that you mentioned, writing about the Confederate soldiers who were writing home in their extreme racism. We also have a question from Paul. Isaac, you wrote about some misunderstandings of the public acts of forgiveness by Branch John. Jean,
Yes.
and the Emmanuel AME survivors. That's what Black people have been required to do, or this is in quotes, that's what Black people have been required to do, and do so willingly, only to see white America pocket those acts of grace and hardly ever return the favor. What are some ways you see white politicians today misinterpreting the forgiveness of Black families?
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And that, like that too, like actually has been one of my great frustrations as well. Yes, like, and because at least for sort of like Christianity, like for sort of like Black people in the state in particular, is a really important thing. Yes, I mean like our faith is extremely important. Like, and like it actually calls at least for us to like actually forgive, like even in extreme circumstances like those kind of things. Like which is what that we have actually done here. Like, actually, by the way, like even after like even after the end of slavery, like we actually did not turn to revenge and hate. Like we actually simply wanted to be treated equally. And sort of like even after like centuries worth of lynchings, like even after like all of that, like horrors, like actually from Jim Crow, et cetera. Yes, and then that like we saw like we actually never turned to hatred and revenge, et cetera. Like all that we actually like have actually wanted is equality, like every single time. And also sort of like even in these instances, sort of like where that like we are sort of actually being killed, like either by cops or white supremacists like Ruth, like we are still sort of actually doing all of that still, like not being hateful, like not being revengeful, etc. And yet, though, that like anytime that like we actually need like that kind of same grace, sort of actually from our sort of like white neighbors and friends, etc., like we actually don't get it. Yes, 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 like and also sort of at least like instead that like what we like often get like is like is this kind of like fear of us anyway. Uh, yes, and then so yes, and then so like for me that like it is like actually shown that like our faith like once again sort of actually has been used against us. Yes, and so like for me like I sort of actually want to like actually challenge like our sort of like white Christians in this state, like in particular, in order to like, actually think about that. Yes, like and also to like yes, like and also to like actually just needs to like actually like yes, like needs to like these was yes, like in terms of needs to like ask themselves yes, in terms of like what it is that they are like willing to do in order to like actually sort of actually turn that around.
When I was in Denmark with the men who had been the student sit-in participants there, they took me to a church that they tried to do a kneel-in, and the sit-ins moved into kneel-ins, skate-ins, all sorts of getting into buildings. And they showed me how the door was barred by the white usher, and one of them asked the usher, who is your God? What does your God look like?
Right.
Yeah. So there are many instances of that. David Carter, who was the leader in Colombia, there was this just this generalized anxiety in Colombia about Easter coming up and where Black people going to come to the churches. And he was a Baptist preacher who was in theology school. And he took the opposite side. He said, why would we want to go to your churches?
Yes,
So
yes.
the church and what kind of Christian you were was very much a part of the sit-in movement, and most white churches failed the test.
Yes, yes. Yes, yes, and also that like that is sort of like one of the great tensions like in this state, especially because like there are Black churches in this state in a large part, simply because that, yes, in terms of that, at least like in like the white churches, that there was still sort of like Jim Crow and racism and white supremacy in the white churches. Yes, like, and also that they were like actually being used like in order to like actually uphold slavery, etc. Yes, and it's like therefore that like if you sort of actually were a Black person and a Christian, like, and sort of actually wanted to like actually feel equal, etc., well, then that you actually had to go off and build your own church, like just like that church that sort of that roof sort of like actually shot up, for instance. Yes, and so yes, and so like for yes, and then that at least and like a painful part of our history in this state, I mean, like, is the fact that for decades that at least actually when it came to like white Christians in general, that they sort of like actually have upheld like really, really awful things against Black people, slavery, Jim Crow. Yes, I mean, just so many things, time and time and time again, and also sort of now again for Donald Trump. Yes, so like again and again and again. You actually have like these sort of like white churches like actually doing this, and also sort of you actually have sort of like Black churches like actually trying to like actually it's like actually sort of like fight racism. Yes, and so like for me, like that kind of history like also has to be grappled with like in this state if we sort of actually really want to move forward together.
Yeah, when you look at the history of slavery, you find that there was a big debate among enslavers about whether the people they were thinking of as property should have access to Christianity, because there were some interpretations in the Bible that you don't own people of your own faith.
Right.
And then there was the anxiety of if you're teaching the Bible, are you also teaching literacy? And South Carolina outlawed literacy. And then there was the decision that you could teach passivity through
Right.
Jesus Christ's acceptance of turning the other cheek. And so maybe Christianity could be of use. That's pretty
Right.
grim, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Now, of course, that was very long ago, but I would say that using religion for purposes is something that will probably never go away.
Yes. Yes, like, and also that, like, I sort of actually have actually seen, like, in my own lifetime, like, in my own life, that like those kind of sentiments, like, actually still in play. Yes, like, and because, as long as I am advocating for things that are really, really easy for sort of like white people and Black people, like in terms of like, interracial lunches and hugs and prayer groups, etc. Yes, like those things are very, very easy, like for that, like all of us to do. Yes, makes us feel good, etc. Yes, and so like as long as I'm actually talking about those things, oh yes, like I am accepted and loved. Oh yes, like great, great. Tristan, as I sort of like actually try to like actually, yes, and then that like that is when the conversation changes quickly, and then that I'm actually seen like as a race baiter, etc., like all these sort of things. Yes, and so like that kind of thing has to change. At least sort of, at least sort of, at least sort of that going forward.
I liked your phrase about the hard work. It's simple, it's clear, and each person could decide what was the hard work for him or herself, and then just go do that work. It's hard to do it. Yeah.
Exactly.
You have another question for us, Julia?
No. Oh, yeah. I was going to say we're right around an hour, so we might want to start any final questions from the audience. There's not been one. We did have a shout out to you, Isaac, from Beverly Barfield. She says hi. I assume we did each other. Was there anything from I have from my notes. One of the things that came up in, I think, the very beginning of your essay collection, or in the preface, I think that you added, Isaac, just prior to the election, was that you were interested in seeing what the results were. And I'm curious now on the other side, what that looks like. And if there was, the election during this civil rights movement, well, there were several, obviously, but I feel like I tried to take a look back if there were any that were comparable. Claudia, if you thought there was any comparison there to what's happened.
Well, there was a big push to get people registered to vote in the 50s and 60s. And one of the reasons John F. Kennedy won was because of Black voters in South Carolina.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, and also that, one of the sort of fascinating things about this cycle, excuse me, was the fact that sort of Black voters in South Carolina actually pushed that Biden over the top. And because his sort of campaign was almost dead until South Carolina. Yes, and then everything changed. Yes, and I think that sort of actually showed the sort of pragmatism of Black voters in the state, simply because that at least from sort of what I can tell, was the fact that they actually thought that he actually had the best chance of beating Trump, period. Yes, and so therefore that actually was a reason why that they actually really sort of actually got behind him, and sort of that even though that there actually were sort of questions at least about his kind of racial history, on the crime bill and the segregation and stuff, etc. Yet though that that kind of pragmatism was that key in order to actually make this a different kind of election cycle for Trump. Yeah.
And we should all be paying attention to all the voter suppression efforts.
Yes.
You don't have a democracy if you are keeping people from voting.
Exactly. Yes.
Agreed. I really appreciate you both talking with us tonight. It's been such an easy discussion for me because I just got to sit back and listen. Y'all are such
Isaac and I are bonding.
That's right. Exactly. Yes. That's good. That's right.
It was great. And thank you to everyone who joined us and watched on the live stream and participated in the chat and sent in your questions. Did Claudia or Isaac, did you have any final closing things you wanted to leave us with? Just put you on the spot or anything?
I would say that one of the things that my book reminded me of, and the people that I talked to reminded me of, is we can all be better human beings. And that really should be our goal in life, is to become better and better, kinder and kinder, more willing to assist others. And I was interviewing noble people who were willing to put their lives on the line for a better world. And they were ordinary people who chose to become extraordinary. So you don't have to start off as some super special person to make a positive difference in the world. It can happen. And I think Isaac is calling us to do that, to do the hard work, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and also that, at least for me, in this book, I was trying to model how it is that we can be angry, but not bitter. Whereas that we can be angry, but also not hate. Yes, and so for me, that is something that I want more people to get used to doing. And also, at least to not try to comfort. like don't rush off it, but at least like until the work is done.
Thank you. Thank you both so much. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your evening. Again, to everyone, don't forget, you can use your coupons to get the books from us tonight or whenever. So we have Claudia's book, Stories of Struggles, and Story of Struggle. And I keep messing up with the S's. I'm sorry. Stories of Struggle. And Isac's Why Didn't We Write It? They're both excellent reads, very fascinating. And thank you again. Have a lovely night, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for this opportunity.
You're welcome. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Julia. Bye-bye.